Derrick Henry's new contract with the Ravens validates that James Cook's contract demands are asinine. I'm breaking that down and a whole lot more today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control our discussion, and the questions this week are phenomenal. Very meaty topics to get into, some very thought-provoking stuff. And let's just dive right into it. The first one today comes from Ethan. Ethan says, with the news of Derrick Henry's contract extension at $15 million per year, do you see that as a positive for Cook's negotiations? No, not hard to see Cook is not in the same tier as Henry, especially by volume, and that Henry's extension could play well to Bean's side of the table. Ethan, this further proves the point that I have been trying to make, that James Cook wants an unreasonable salary based on the caliber of player he is and the contributions that he makes to the team. Derrick Henry had over 2,100 yards from scrimmage and 18 touchdowns last year. He's been over 1,900 yards 3 of the last 5 seasons. He's had 7 consecutive double-digit touchdown seasons. $15 million a year makes sense for him. James Cook wanting the same thing does not compute. If Henry got $18 million a season, then we can talk about Cook at 15. That didn't happen. James Cook's a good player. I love his growth. I love the explosive plays. But pretending like he's in the Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs tier is nuts. And so this should help Brandon Beane validate that $15 million a season is an inappropriate contract request for James Cook. Next one today comes from Mike. Mike says, what training camp battle are you looking forward to the most? It's a good question. We got some good battles this year. I think generally it's the secondary. A lot of good competition in the secondary, but specifically Cam Lewis. Can draft pick Jordan Hancock, a 5th-round pick, bump him from the roster? Feels like the intent with Jordan Hancock was the exact role that Cam Lewis fills. Can play in the slot, can play safety, special teams. You get a younger, bigger, more athletic version of Cam Lewis. And so the question that I have is, do they have enough confidence in young players at safety and corner to not feel like they have to roster Cam Lewis? I like and respect Cam Lewis. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a useful player. But if the Bills were to opt for Cam Lewis over guys like Jordan Hancock or over a guy like Derek Forrest, that would bother me. And I hope that with every decision that the Bills make in finalizing this 53-man roster, I want them to opt for the ceiling and not the floor. Give me the younger, more athletic, bigger players compared to the low floor. We know what they are. There's a level of comfort. There's time on task. Like, that's good, meaningful, and important. But it's time, particularly on the defensive side of the football, for the Bills to lean into athleticism. They've done a good job in free agency and in the draft in giving them the opportunity to do that. Now let's see it happen with the roster decisions. Another example of this is Dorian Strong over Dane Jackson. Go with the younger, more athletic player that has upside compared to, oh, well, we know what this guy is. I want to see them lean into upside and not the floor with these roster decisions. So it's a secondary in general, but it's the Jordan Hancock, Derek Forrest, Cam Lewis conversation. It's the Dorian Strong, Dane Jackson conversation. Next one comes from Gadil. Gadil says, why do you think the Bills' offensive mindset of everybody eats worked while Green Bay tried to replicate it, but it didn't work as well? What did Green Bay do wrong or differently? Let's talk about this because I want to push back on this idea that it didn't work for Green Bay. It was a major. Everybody came out of 2023 thinking that it was a major success for Green Bay to embrace the everybody eats, don't need a number one receiver, funnel the ball around, let Jordan Love just run the play without the burden of funneling targets to any one receiver. It was widely celebrated. You read articles about how Jordan Love loved the approach and how he just has the freedom to run the offense. They beat the Bills to this. They were the original everybody eats team. They maybe didn't brand it and talk about it to the level that the Bills did, but they were the team that did it in 2023. Everybody thought it was extremely successful. Then 2024 happened, and everybody thinks that it didn't work in Green Bay. It did. Like, what are we talking about? The Packers were 7th in EPA per pass in 2024, higher than 2023. What are we talking about? The Packers were 3rd in yards per pass in 2024. What are we talking about that it didn't work? Jordan Love got injured early in the season. He missed a couple of games, and when he initially came back, he was banged up. I think more than anything, Jordan Love needs to be a more consistent player. But we're talking about a top 25% of the league passing offense in terms of EPA, and people are wondering that it didn't work? I don't get it. Not only did it work, it was better than the year that everyone thought it did work. So I think that's a big false narrative that's going on across the league right now. And as these receivers are becoming $35, $40 million a year, you got to ask yourself some questions. Is it better to have one Jamar Chase, or is it better to have, for the same cost, 3.5 Khalil Shakirs, right? That's what you have to ask yourself. That's the reality of the approach that teams like the Bills and the Packers and the Chiefs are making, that are embracing this everybody eats mindset. All right, we've got a banger of a question on the other side of it about Dalton Kincaid and a whole lot more, so be sure to stick with me. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's a kind of atmosphere you can only experience live. You have to experience it live, and this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop the closer we get to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. Look, you know the NFL schedule just dropped, and you better believe I'm already looking at the fall calendar and picking which games I want to hit. We've got Bills games in Charlotte, Bills games in Atlanta. Gametime is the spot to get the tickets. I mean, Gametime makes scoring NFL tickets just so simple. And with Gametime guarantee, your tickets are 100% authentic, will arrive on time, and you'll always get the best price with fees included, so that what you see is what you pay. If you've never used Gametime to grab NFL seats, now is the time. It's seriously a game day upgrade. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Got a question here from Dave on Dalton Kincaid. Dave says, what kind of year would you think Dalton Kincaid would need to have for him to win over his critics? Another year like the last two, and I'll be ready to move on from him. I would be open to see him traded before this season starts. His value, based on what people expect out of him this year, would be highest now rather than how it would be if he had another mediocre season. It's essential that his trade value would be higher right now than if he had another mediocre season. Let's talk about this. I think, first of all, measuring Dalton Kincaid's 2025 season might be difficult with raw production stats. I'm planning on a target distribution podcast in the coming weeks, which will ground me, if you will, in setting my own expectations for how I see the production distributing amongst the pass catchers this year. But there's one thing that we do know is that the Bills want to throw the ball to Dalton Kincaid. Kincaid finished last season with the highest rate of targets per route run of any NFL tight end that ran at least 200 routes last year. 0.28. The highest. He had 91 targets as a rookie in a season where, from a production perspective, it was objectively a top 10 receiving season in the history of rookie NFL tight ends. Last year, he was on pace for just shy of 100 targets if you take his 13-game pace and applied it to his 17 games. The reality is we need the results of these targets to be better. And most of that includes Josh Allen being better for Dalton Kincaid. You've heard these numbers from me. I'm going to say them again. Only 69% of Dalton Kincaid's targets were catchable, the lowest in the league among tight ends. When targeted 10 or more yards down the field, his catchable target rate was an embarrassing 37%. His separation metrics, top 10 in the NFL 2 years in a row. His yards after catch metrics, top 10 in the NFL 2 years in a row. Josh Allen has to be better for Dalton Kincaid. And there's a lot of fans that have completely soured on Kincaid, and that really surprises me. We've seen so many Bills players that frustrated fans over their first two seasons put it all together in year three. Josh Allen, Dawson Knox, Khalil Shakir, Spencer Brown, James Cook, Christian Benford, Taron Johnson. The list goes on and on. In fact, in Dave's text exchange with me, Dave went as far as to say that maybe, this is quote, maybe they were uncatchable because he's too mentally rigid and he's not adapting his route to the coverage and the team's needs. Just because he runs a great route doesn't mean that his route is run exactly in terms of what the play demands. I can't even get myself to understand that. I've never watched Dalton Kincaid a single time and thought to myself, you know what? He's too mentally rigid in how he's playing the game, and it's affecting Josh Allen from throwing him accurate passes. Never once crossed my mind. I actually wrote an article a few months ago breaking down Dalton Kincaid from every angle. And in the article, I included a film reel of every single Dalton Kincaid target from 2024. The truth, folks, always in the tape. You want the answer? Watch the tape. Separation is happening. Josh Allen has got to throw more accurate passes to Dalton Kincaid. And I'm going to put a link in today's show notes to that article if you want to read it and watch the reel. Most importantly, watch the film reel. 90-something targets or however many targets he had in succession, showing you what he did on the field and what the results of those targets were. The circumstances for Kincaid in 2024 tell the story. He's extremely gifted. He's getting open. He's producing after the catch. He's had plenty of flashes. But there's a lot of fans that are sour on Dalton Kincaid. Let it play out. Open your mind to the possibility that he can be a big-time answer for this offense. He's been heavily featured for 2 years. The Bills' offense has been really good. Has it been perfect? No. Did he meet production expectations this past season? No. Are there reasons for that? Absolutely. I've given him time and time again. But we want to resolve to saying that he's too mentally rigid to run the play correctly? I can't even get myself to understand that. And as for trading Kincaid, I am far more concerned about missing out on Dalton Kincaid's ceiling than gaining whatever draft capital you would get by trading him. Dave even said that Kincaid's skill set is redundant in this offense. By what player? What player is like Kincaid? None of them. But these are real things that people believe. I'm not promising you that Dalton Kincaid is going to be the next greatest tight end in the NFL. I think he's an extremely talented player that has had very good moments, that has very good metrics, and there's very clear explanations as to maybe why 2024 didn't go the way we wanted it to. Can we let it play out? Can we give the guy a chance? He's got a lot of ceiling. He's got a lot of ability, and he can really matter a ton for this offense. And this team wants to throw him the ball, as evidenced by the numbers. I'm not promising you that he's going to be amazing. I think there's a good chance that he is. But can we open our mind to the possibility that it all comes together this season like it has for so many other Bills players in year 3? Especially for a guy that's late to playing football. I feel like it's the Spencer Brown conversation all over again. I like how that one turned out. We'll see how this one goes. Gordon says, listening to reports on a minicamp, which I know doesn't mean a whole lot, but I couldn't help but get excited about the reports on Jackson Hawes and the idea of 13 personnel. I know the Bills like to run a 6 offensive lineman, but if they could make Hawes even a little more of a route runner in the short to intermediate area, I like the idea of 13 and either running the ball down people's throats or using 3 tight ends to attack certain matchups. I know it would not be a volume package, but if they took 50 or so of the 200-plus snaps they ran of 6 offensive line sets, I think that would be a nice changeup. What are your thoughts on using 13 with the addition of Hawes' blocking ability? And do you think the Bills have the other skill sets for it, or could you even see them having an appetite to do this? Yeah, I'm sure this will be part of it. Absolutely. And while I'm not super high on Spencer Hawes' receiving profile based on the college tape, he certainly adds more as a receiver than Alec Anderson would, or Bobby Hart, or Tommy Doyle, or David Edwards, guys that have done this in the past. And I think you will see some 13 personnel. I mean, go back to last year. Quentin Morris played 21% of the snaps. In 2023, he played 18% of the snaps. There's a path for Hawes to see the field. Let's not forget that we saw Mac Hollins last year play 110 snaps of inline tight end for the Bills. There will be opportunities, not to mention special teams. I think Spencer Hawes could very easily log 500-plus snaps on offense and special teams combined this year. So, yes, I think 13 personnel will be sprinkled in. I think sometimes that could mean not using the 6 offensive linemen. Spencer Hawes doesn't have a super exciting receiving profile, but it would be better than a 6th offensive lineman. And I think he's going to play a lot of snaps. And don't forget the return game stuff. The blocking skill showing up in the return game is going to matter a lot as well. So, very useful player, and that's why I talk so much about the need for the Bills to get this tight end 3. Quentin Morris now signed with the Jaguars. Jackson Hawes has got a really, really clear opportunity to step in and claim a lot of snaps and provide a lot of value to this team. Dent says, if you had to choose one of these 2 options now for a hopeful playoff run this season, which would you prefer? Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins are healthy for the whole playoffs and performing at 100% of their capability, or Greg Rousseau and Joey Bosa are healthy for the whole playoffs and performing at 100% of their capability. Dent goes on to say, I think this is a fun way to think about the impact of these players, confidence in the depth behind them, etc. It's very difficult. But I do land on Bosa and Rousseau. We know the issue for this team in the playoffs has been defensive line impact. And Bosa at 100% is one of the premier playmaking defensive ends in the NFL. They haven't had that. And then you combine that with Rousseau. Wow, right? Like, that gets me really excited. I'm not diminishing Brown and Dawkins. They're awesome. I love those guys. But I just trust Josh Allen to figure it out. If one of them were hurt or not playing as well. We've seen the other side of that coin too much. And I do think the Bills have some depth in Grable, Ryan Vandemark, that I feel like they can figure that out on offense, but they have not been able to figure it out on defense. You're telling me that Bosa and Rousseau, 100% healthy and playing to their fullest capability, that's the game changer that we've needed. So sign me up for that piece, but a very compelling conversation nonetheless. All right, coming up next, we're talking about some of the defensive line philosophy out there if the Bills should have interest in Thomas Morstead, a punter that was just released. And then another question about my background that got some good feedback last time. There's a few follow-ups that we'll get into here on the other side of it. So folks, be sure to stick with me. All right, folks, welcome back. The next one today comes from DK. DK says, do you believe that the NFL as a whole is beginning to shift their philosophy on the makeup of defensive lines? Seems like more teams are A, getting bigger, longer, and stronger on the edge, less of the 240, 250-pound bendy edge guys who are also better at the run, and B, getting smaller and quicker at defensive tackle to provide more pass rush up the middle. DK continues to say, I would also like your thoughts on why this is happening. I believe it's twofold. First, offenses have been using a lot more outside zone the past few seasons due to the popularity of the McVay and Shanahan style offenses. Second, and more importantly, the advent of mobile quarterbacks like Mahomes, Allen Jackson, etc., that can evade the outside pressure more easily than pressure that comes right in their face. I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I don't think it's quite universal where every team is going size, length, power on the edge, twitch, explosiveness, penetration, skill on the inside. You're seeing a lot of that, but it's not quite universal. I think you're always going to have a role for the 240 to 250 pound pass rusher, right? That can win with speed and bend. Like there will always be a place for those guys. You still see them all over the place. I mean, literally Abdul Carter is that. He was a number 3 pick in the draft. So I still think that prototype is extremely valuable. You're always going to have, or you still have odd front teams, right, that play 3 down linemen, 4 linebackers, where it's a 5 technique that is in some ways like your long arm, heavy hands, power player, and then you have the outside linebacker outside of them. So you're still going to have those structures. But I think the biggest shift comes from the inside players. I think that's where the biggest transition has been. I think the edge piece is pretty similar to the way that it's been, but the inside piece is different, where not only do you want the penetration and pass rush ability to affect the quarterback, but now all of a sudden it's not necessarily downhill runs right at you where you have to be able to hunker down and eat space. You need to be able to flow laterally with the play. You got to be able to pursue down the line of scrimmage. So it's, you want quick pressure in the face of the quarterback, and that is more meaningful. Like, it's better to get pressure in the face of the quarterback than off the edge. But also, those guys got to be able to move laterally, because if they can't, creases happen. You run wide zone, and your nose tackle can't flow laterally, you're just creating lanes. So there's a run piece that matters to that as well, where it's not just smaller and quicker for pass rush. Smaller and quicker so you can work laterally down the line of scrimmage as well. Good question there. Matthew said, should the Bills be interested in punter Thomas Morstead? Of course, Thomas Morstead was just released, and we have a lot of questions about the Bills punter situation. Thomas Morstead's been a good NFL punter for a long time. But I will say that his age absolutely showed last year. He just turned 39. Last year, he was 3rd worst in EPA among punters in the NFL, lowest hang time of his career. So it feels like he might be at the end there. And so because of that, I find myself okay with the Bills leaning into the upside of Jake Camarda. Jake Camarda did not have a good 2024 season. I'm not going to try to sell you on that, but he was pretty good in 2022, and he was excellent in 2023. Camarda in 2023 was 9th in punter EPA. And it's not uncommon for a young punter to not deliver early in their career. They bounce around a little bit, and then they find their spot. I hope that's what happens with Camarda in Buffalo. I also have to believe that the Bills have seen Camarda punt a little bit this offseason. Should have a decent gauge for where he's at. You foil that against the age and decline of Morstead, and you make the decision. So if they were concerned about Camarda and they saw something they liked in Morstead, go do it. But if it's the other way around, which is more likely that you've seen something in Camarda that you do like and you're concerned about Morstead, well, stay the course. Give yourself a chance at a young punter that could stick around for a while, because, I mean, let's face it, the Bills haven't had a ton of like long-term stability at punter in a long time. You see these punters that are on the same team for like 10 years in a row. And since Brian Moorman, the Bills have had guys that maybe had a little bit of good time. Sam Martin had a good couple-year run, but it's been like Colton Schmidt and Corey Bojorquez, and then Corey Bojorquez winds up being a pretty decent punter. The Matt Ariza situation, Matt Hawk, right? It's been a journey. And so could Morstead maybe give you a decent season this year? Maybe. He didn't have a good year last year. But the possibility that Camarda could be a long-term answer, that's appealing to me. This guy's a 4th-round pick. Had 2 good seasons. Had a great season in 2023. Let's hope the Bills can unlock that guy. Law says, I really enjoyed the episode with you talking about your background. I got a lot of great feedback on that. I appreciate people reaching out and saying that they enjoyed what I said. It was actually the last Herd Mentality episode. So if you didn't catch that, go back and listen. It's at the end of that episode. Law continues and says, if it isn't prying, I would be interested in you talking about this more. You are the only sports analyst I listen to now, and I'm interested in knowing how you got so good. That's very kind. Thank you. Law has 3 specific questions. I'll answer them in order. First one from Law is, while you talked about learning about football, did you have any football-related jobs before this podcast? So I started producing football content in 2013. That's when I started. And I worked for a website called BuffaloBillsDraft.com. I was actually with Ryan Talbot. We worked together there. And then from there, I had a number of different stops along the way where I produced content, mostly written content, some podcasting, some video, but mostly written content. And then in 2017, you had 4 years of opportunity. In 2017, I kind of felt I was finally in the place where I could do it full time. And that's when I really, pushed the gas pedal down and tried to really carve out my path in this space. But that would be it. I mean, the learning piece goes back. I mean, really my whole life, really my entire life has been that. But started producing content in 2013 and went full time in 2017. Law continues with the second question. He says, you have an analytic communication capability that is off the charts and would apply to many professions. Were there any classes or previous jobs or mentors that helped in this area? So I was on my high school debate team at Weddington High School, and I actually won the county debate tournament my senior year of high school. My teacher was Miss Innes, and she was phenomenal, an excellent teacher who taught me how to build arguments, taught me a lot about communication strategies. In college, I did take a public speaking class, which I found to be pretty helpful as well. But maybe the most important thing was I worked in management for 15 years prior to going full-time in football content, and I was around a lot of very bad communication. And I sat through a lot of very unnecessary meetings. And I think seeing a lot of that was helpful in how I strategize communicating to you on this podcast. So I guess the high school debate team was successful there, public speaking class in college, and then working in business management and managing people for 15 years, seeing a lot of bad and some good, and trying to apply those things. I try to be very self-aware and apply those things to what I do here. And the last question was, why are you a Buffalo Bills fan living in North Carolina? Were you originally from New York, or were there other factors that made you a fan? Yeah, I was born in Buffalo. Lived on Grand Island until I was a little over 11 years old, like 11 and a half years old. My family moved to Charlotte. I'm 11 and a half. I didn't have a choice, right? Moved with my mom, dad, and brothers and sisters to Charlotte. And, I was born into a Buffalo Bills loving family that, my parents were born and raised in Buffalo. My dad from the West Side, my mom from North Tonawanda. I was born 1986 at Children's Hospital. Lived on Grand Island for 11 and a half years. Moved with my family to North Carolina. But you could take the boy out of Buffalo, but you can't take the Buffalo out of the boy. Those Buffalo Bills, that Buffalo Bills fandom runs deep. Yeah, that was never something that left us, right? A lot of people have since moved away from Buffalo and still Bills fans. That's not something you can shake. So that's a little bit more on my story, and enjoyed answering these questions. I'm always willing. I try to be transparent with who I am and what I do. So if you have these questions, don't hesitate to ask them. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. A lot of good topics to get into. I really appreciate these questions that were sent in. Next week is a fun week, one that I look forward to every single year, where I do a series. This will be the 5th year in a row on the top 10 most important players to the future of the Buffalo Bills. So that is going to be next week. And we got some new wrinkles this year, couple additions to the panel. If you haven't seen this before, get excited. It's a fun content series, and we start that on Monday. So don't miss it. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.